All fan bases feel a bit tortured at times. Some fan bases have a rougher go than others. For Indians fans and Cubs fans, it's been especially tough. On November 2nd, 2016, one of those fan bases would finally be rewarded, while the other would have to wait until next year. Again. You know how the story turns out, but we're firing up the time machine and going back to 2016 to take another look at Game 7 of the 2016 World Series. So hop in and join us. It's the Sports Pod Time Machine. Welcome to the Sports Pod Time Machine, everybody. Wherever, however, and whenever you've joined us, thank you and welcome aboard. We're traveling through time, looking at the greatest games, moments, and events in sports history. Today, the course is set for 2016, November 2nd, 2016. Just 6 days before an election, a presidential election that will have major historical repercussions. So this is a week that has two events that will echo in eternity, but our focus is Game 7, Cubs-Indians, World Series. As always, I'm joined by my co-pilots, Rich Glanzer and Pete Sod. Richie, Pete, what's going on, guys?
Not much. I cannot wait to get into this game. The Cubs versus Indians, some streak is going to end.
Yeah, 100%. This was definitely a game that, you watch it and you watch it again and you realize, holy cow, as Phil Rizzuto would say, it was pretty unbelievable.
Yeah, the game, as great as it is, this game is all about the fans. I know everything's about the fans, but this is like a 4.5-hour study of fandom. I mean, I continuously found myself reflecting on what it means to be a fan while I was watching this game. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So you have the Cubs fan base, and it's on the verge of ending a 108-year drought, and they have the Indians fan base that's on the verge of winning their first World Series since, was it 48? So you have these, either way, you can have long-suffering fans finally being rewarded. It's poetic, it's heartwarming, it's beautiful. But then you go to the other side of it. The harsh reality that the average ticket price was over $2,000. So none of those true fans who suffered could even be there for this game unless they took out a second mortgage. And I know we're going to have a lot to say about that later. We're going to get into a pretty interesting talk about fans and fandom and these two fan bases. But for now, we're going to actually start with the broadcast. We're going to get to the fans later. We're going to get to everything later. But we're going to go right to the broadcast. It's a Fox game. Pete, what'd you think of the broadcast?
You got Joe Buck with John Smoltz. And then you got on the sideline Kenny Rosenthal and Tom Verducci. Look, people have opinions of Joe Buck back and forth. When it comes to baseball, Buck is actually – I got to say he's decent, and maybe even better than decent. He's pretty good. Smoltz is good. He gets on my nerves a little bit, though. He's a little too much about how he was when he played. Ken Rosenthal's an annoying pain in the ass. And Verducci is okay. He was okay. It was the broadcast was a typical Fox broadcast, nothing too crazy, but I don't know. I wonder if Smoltz was actually the guy who should be calling this game with Buck.
I got to say, and I don't know, Richie, I just want to jump in real quick with one point, just because you said Smoltz. I think Smoltz delivers in this game. He predicts, and Smoltz is great like this. Smoltz has this way. He's so smart. I think he was Romo before Tony Romo. He has a way of getting into the head of every player and manager and just seeing these situations. He's not a great salesman for the game because he's constantly right in a game that's trying to grow, that's trying to appeal to new fans and to younger fans. Smoltz is always kind of, grumpy, curmudgeon-y, kind of complaining about all these aspects of the game that he wished were different, but he's so smart. And he predicts that Rajai Davis is going to have a chance on a ball down and in before Davis hits that home run. I mean, he says it right before it happens. He says he's going to get this chance. Rajai Davis is going to get a chance on a ball down and in. It's going to be his one shot, and he's going to have to do something with it. It was incredible. And even Buck, I like Buck. I do think he's a better baseball guy than football guy, but I like Buck. And I think it's a great call on Davis's homer. And I don't want to step on Rich. I know it's a play he's going to talk about later, but there's a great base running play that comes up later in the game. And in real time, Buck is able to recognize how important it is. So I think both of these guys do a good job. And I actually liked having Rosenthal and Verducci on the telecast. I think it was good. I think they did something really big in getting rid of Aaron Andrews, because it really centered the telecast on baseball. And at one point, when Verducci does the manager segment, they ask the manager, talk to the manager, he puts Madden on the spot about bringing Chapman in to Game 6, which will come into play in Game 7. So Verducci does a good job there, something I don't think Aaron Andrews would have done if they did the typical Fox a telecast with Aaron Andrews as one of the dugout people or sideline people. So I think it's pretty good. And honestly, I think it's an all-time great studio, too. The studio where at that time you had Burkhart, who's great at what he does, but then they paired up A-Rod, Pete Rose, and Frank Thomas. And that it was I think for baseball-wise, it's really kind of the best compilation of studio guys.
I'll agree to that one. That studio was unbelievable. That's an unbelievable studio. I mean, to have Pete Rose sitting there and just that in itself. Mm-hmm. And the big hurt's the big hurt, and he's always winning. A-Rod is, you can call him whatever you want. Sometimes he's just
can't call him the Mets owner.
No, you cannot. But he can be a bit much. But he's actually not bad in this broadcast at all.
No. And I think obviously he does the ESPN, the Sunday night stuff. The studio, I think, is where he shined more. And kind of that give and take with Pete Rose. I thought it was entertaining. Frank Thomas being in the mix, Burkhart leading it. I thought it was great. The game's going to have 40 million viewers, huge numbers for a World Series game. Game 7, 86, Mets Red Sox. That's the most watched World Series game in history, between 55 and 60 million. Game 6, 1980, Phillies Royals. That's the highest rated game in terms of rating share. But this game, 40 million viewers. That's a big game, big number for a World Series game. Pete is telling us about what he thought. Richie, what do you think about the broadcast?
10 out of 10, except for one big thing that they missed at the end. But 10 out of 10, the announcers were unbelievable. This was Tony Romo before Tony Romo. I mean, Schmaltz called a 2-strike bunt, squeeze play, safety squeeze. He called it. No one at 2-strike. No one ever does that. And he's like, it's going to happen. And it did happen. And it was fouled off and it was strike 3. Buck talked about Kyle Hendricks. He kept on saying, Madden, I'll get into it more later, but he was the one that kept on saying, Madden looks like he wants to get Lester. Lester's coming in. Is this really a smart move? He was calling that all game talking about this. I mean, it was just incredible, the foresight that these guys have. Even Kenny, and what I love about a sideline reporter is when they give you real information that's going to be used. And he told everybody that he spoke to Madden, and Madden says, I don't want to put Lester into a dirty inning. I don't think that would be appropriate. And that meant that, if there was a man on base, he wasn't going to bring Lester in. And we'll get to that later again. Schmaltz said, about Chapman, the more you see them, the less they become electric. About their relievers. Hitters' eyes are more comfortable. And that's just, they were right. I mean, it was just correct call after correct call after correct call. And I just thought it was a 10 out of 10 broadcast. Even, by the way, during the rain delay, when someone says, well, the Indians have the momentum, Pete Rose is like, I don't know about that. They have the top of the lineup coming up, the Cubs. and Indians had 4, 5, 6. Just a fantastic broadcast, 10 out of 10. The one big mistake was they almost missed the game. There was a 3-1 pitch with 2 outs that could have given the Cubs the World Series. It was a walk, but they missed that pitch by showing a random fan in attendance. Imagine if that was a pop-up and they missed the pitch. Unbelievable. So that was terrible, but that wasn't the announcer's fault.
And Buck has a great call on the Rajai Davis homer. His final call when they clinched the World Series, it's not great, but you cut him some slack. It's like close to 1 a.m. at that point. And he kind of steps back and he lets the pictures do the talking after that. So the game-ending call is not terrific. It's not this memorable game-ending call. The Rajai Davis call, I think, is awesome. And I think they do a good job. From the studio to the dugout guys to Buck and Smoltz. And Smoltz is great at, as smart as he is, he knows to let the game breathe. Same thing with Buck. I mean, Buck is basically, in a sense, I think he's the voice of a generation now for big games. I mean, Michaels is still there because of the 2 sports, right? I mean, Buck's doing the World Series every year, and Buck is in the Super Bowl rotation. So basically, for for a generation of people, he is the big game broadcaster. Like we had Vince Scully, or we had a combination of guys with the Summerall and the Madden and the Scully and all that. But for a whole generation, and us too, for these last however many years, Buck is that guy.
Look, people are going to get on him for a couple of reasons. One, his father was a legend, so they think he got, the job through nepotism and stuff like that. And people always say, well, he's rooting against my team, which is a running joke now. He roots against every team, I mean, and keep in mind, Vince Scully, a national treasure who everyone loves. No one loved him in '86. All the Met fans thought he was for the Red Sox, or the Red Sox fans thought he was with Mets. So it's just, I think people are used to their homer announcing team. I see it all the time. People are like, oh, these guys are rooting against us. Well, it's just because they're not cheerleading for your team. They're just calling it down the middle. So I thought Buck did a really, really good job.
And it becomes a compliment, because if everyone thinks that you're rooting against them, then you really are playing it down the middle, because every fan base has that same problem with Buck, much like many of them had the same problem with Scully. So
they were like that with Costas too. Costas was the same way. Bob Costas, people hated Bob Costas because he always was down the middle. And then you got to see him one year actually call a Yankee game on Yes, and you actually got to hear a guy who sat there and really is a Yankee fan, and he's talking about it like this is the greatest thing ever. Meanwhile, how many great games did Costas call too? Same idea.
Absolutely. So now we're going to go with the 3-play replay. You know the rules. We each pick one play, so 3 plays, and we're going to get into the ending. We're going to wind up covering all aspects of the game through our different categories. But for right now, we're into the 3-play replay. We're each picking a play. And Pete, start us off, because you're going right from the beginning.
Dexter Fowler leads off the game with the home run off of Kluber. Here's the thing. Before he comes to bat, they're just playing up how good Kluber really is. He's, as the starting pitcher, he's looking for 3 wins in the World Series, which the last time it happened was in 1968. And then before that, you had Bob Gibson in 67, first pitcher to win a Game 1, a Game 4, and a Game 7. And they're just all over that this could be this historic night. And then Dexter Fowler comes up and hits a home run. Holy cow, what the hell happens in that one moment? And you see that the Cubs are there, and they're there to win this. They're just ready to win, ready to play, and he just knocks a freaking leadoff home run. It's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, you can't set a better tone, right?
And not at all. It's like you're sitting there and you're just like, really? You're so good? Take this. Have a nice one. Deal with us. You're going to have to play. You're going to have to play from behind. You're going to play from behind off the first batter. It's unreal.
Yeah, and the stadium's electric. And I know Rich is going to have something to say, and we're going to talk about the composition of the crowd later on in the podcast. But you are playing the game in Cleveland. It's an electric crowd. It's this, obviously the stakes couldn't be any higher. And right off the bat, you're going to send that message. You're going to quiet the crowd, although being what seemed like a predominantly Cub crowd, you're not necessarily going to quiet the crowd. But yeah, there's no better, bigger, louder, stronger message than Dexter Fowler sent on that opening at bat.
And I think it was important that you say that, they started the game. They made sure that Cleveland started the game from behind, because that's an important factor, because Cleveland, just like, every game takes a different, approach, and every game is a different animal all unto itself. But sometimes when you guys know when you're playing a sport, when you're watching a sport, and you just never could get ahead, you never could get that lead, and you're always like, all right, cool, we tied the game up, but it'd be nice to have a lead and make the other team on its heels. And the Cubs made sure that, hey, you're not if you score a run, you're only tying it up, and that was really big. And to me, I think that was huge.
Think about this: over 100 years of World Series, and that's the first Game 7 leadoff home run ever. Talk about just putting a nail in the coffin and saying, we're here. Deal with us. You're behind already. And they just did it. It's unbelievable. Dexter Fowler was unbelievable to be able to hit a leadoff home run.
And it feeds off what happened the 2 prior games, right? I mean, Cleveland's up 3-1 in the series. We go to 3-2. We go to 3-3. And you start off that way, the message becomes even louder, even stronger. For me, I'm going to the top of the 4th. And you talk about sending a message. For me, Chris Bryant, he's going to single off Kluber, full count. It's a great at-bat. He works the count, fouls off a few pitches, so he singles. Now, there's going to be 1 out. The inning's going to progress. And Bryant, with 1 out, first and third. He's going to tag. Bryant's going to tag on a short fly to Rajai Davis. It almost looks like it takes Rajai Davis by surprise. Again, it's a short fly, and Gary Jones is the third base coach for the Cubs. You can't really tell. I mean, is this Jones' call? Is it Chris Bryant's call? Again, it looks like it takes Davis by surprise. Not a bad throw. A little late because Davis is going to hesitate, almost the look like, was this guy really running? It's not a bad throw, but there's a delay on the throw. Great slide right under the tag of Roberto Perez. And I think it's huge. Obviously, in a game that's going to wind up being decided by a run, every run's going to be huge. But it's just that mentality that we're going to take this game, right? We're going to take this game. And we've talked about this. This comes up in almost every podcast we do with these great games, that champions have to take games. It's a mentality. This came up in our Giants-Bills podcast, how the Bills 4 years in a row, as good as they were, once they got to that stage, it was as if they were afraid to lose. They weren't there to win. And it's just this killer mentality that Chris Bryant is saying, I have this opportunity. There's a run right here. There's a run on the table. I'm going to take it. And John Smoltz, to go back to the broadcast, Smoltz says in the opening that you can't be afraid to fail. And he's right? Champions go in with this killer instinct. And I think in that Chris Bryant play, not only is it a run, but it's something that's saying we're going to take every opportunity. We're not going to leave this game having left anything on the table. We're going to fire every single bullet we have. And you saw it in that play. And by the way, this will come up later, so I don't want to step on it. But Madden's criticized for using Chapman in games 5, 6, and 7. But I think it's that same mentality. We're here. We're going to go for it. We're going to win. We're going to leave nothing, no regrets. We're leaving nothing on the table. We're leaving no bullets in the chamber. And you saw that with the Chris Bryant tag on the sacrifice fly. It's a mentality. It was a mentality that I think permeated through that Cubs team after they got down 3-1. And that's why it's an important play. Obviously important because of run, but more so I just think important because it's this message that a signal to the dugout, a signal to the fan base, a signal to everybody that we're here to win this.
It was a little surprising because, if you ever played, Sunday softball, on a fly ball to the outfield with a man on third, throw home. Because every second you wait, that guy could run and you lose a half a second. And I couldn't believe watching that play because, listen, the great part about watching rewatching these games is you forget that. I had no recollection of that. And so I'm watching it, and when I see the play happen, I'm like, oh, he didn't throw it immediately. He would have been out if he did. And I was like, well, I hope he gets a chance to make up for that later. But,
it's a very quick stutter, but especially when you're playing on that level, that's all it takes is that.
Yeah, I mean,
don't paint the picture. I don't want to paint the picture of, Rajai Davis is like staring down the runner or waiting. It's just this real, half a second. It's noticeable to the viewer, but it's not anything where he waited, looked at any other bases.
He didn't read the ball to say Rawlings on it. He did throw it pretty quickly, but you didn't throw it. You know what? It's so funny because when I watch women's college softball, and I do watch it, though their fundies, as Keith Hernandez says it, are on point. That would never happen in a college World Series game, but it happens in the major leagues. And it's just is unbelievable. Like I was shocked he made as great a play as Bryant did. It was too shallow. He needed a mistake for him to be safe, and he got it.
And that's part of being aggressive. Part of being aggressive is playing those percentages that mistakes are going to happen, and you're going to force them, and you're going to be there to take advantage of them after you do force them. So, it was a good, and it's tough to say because in hindsight, if it doesn't work, am I going to be saying how do you take that chance when on a shallow fly ball? So, but I think it's a great chance to take, and I think you want to be aggressive in these games. You want to set the tone in these games. You want to dictate the pace in these games, and that takes us to Rich's moment.
So, for me, one of the most things I like about baseball so much is when a player gets his first hit and a player gets his last hit. And, when David Ross knew going into this game, this was his last game. It was announced he was retiring. And this is a guy who just, in 15 years, he had a 15-year career. And you're like, wow, that's really good. Only in 2 seasons did he play more than 81 games, in 2006 and 2007. Yet he won 2 World Series in 2013, and spoiler alert, he's going to win this one too. So, it's a backup catcher. How important can this guy be in on a team? Incredibly important. So before I get to the play, he's in the dugout because he's the backup. And Rizzo comes up to him, and Rizzo's his mic. He's like, "I'm so nervous. I'm so amped. I'm so like, and then he bites Ross. He literally bites him. And Ross, the fatherly figure that he is, he's like, well, he gives him good advice. He's like, basically calm down. We're going to get this, whatever he said. He just was basically, just like, all right, chill out, bud. And so he comes in. And immediately, we'll get to more of this, but immediately, the old crusty veteran makes two pretty big mistakes. He makes an error on his very first throw, and then there's a wild pitch where instead of letting Rizzo get to the ball and making a good throw to Lester, he slides, takes the ball from Rizzo, throws a weak throw to Lester covering home, and 2 runs score. And that's really, those runs were a lot on him. So when he comes up, it was a 5-1 game at that point. Now it makes it 5-3. And he comes up, and this, this could be his last. It did turn out to be his last at bat, but it could have. He didn't know that at the time. And he's going against Andrew Miller, who's just, one of the best relievers in baseball at that moment. And he gets an 0-2 count, then 1-2, and then he crushes a home run. He crushes a home run for his last hit, and he ended up walking later. But it was just an incredible moment. It's like, okay, my bad. Those 2 runs on me. Here's one back, and just to make it 6-3 there, 6-3 versus 5-3, and to more importantly, possibly take away the momentum that Cleveland was going to have. And like, hey, by the way, Miller doesn't have it, and I just proved it. And I just thought that was just a great at bat.
And every great game, looks, this is going to be historic either way, but every great game has to have like that storybook element. And I think that's what Ross brought to this, right? There's that little storybook element, the grizzly old vet in his last game. Not only are they going to end this drought, but that Ross is going to have this moment, and that this moment plays out in front of 40 million viewers. It was special, and a storybook is really the only way to say it.
And if you're listening to this podcast or even watching it, Google Ross. Look what he looks like during that game. He doesn't look 39. He looks around 53. That's what even made it even better. Like, he just looked the part of the old-time catcher who's played too many games, and it was just amazing.
And 1 concussion too many. I mean, he had so many concussions in his career. He was really he wasn't just a backup. He really was a third-string catcher. He was he was there for Lester. That's what he was there for. He was his personal catcher.
He was there for Lester, but he was also there as when you say third string catcher, almost like the third bench, the second bench coach, the third manager in a way. I mean, he really Rizzo and Bryant just like, for lack of a better word, adores him. They adored him. They loved him. The team loved him. And, at the end of the game, they carry him off and like Rudy. And it was just like it was a magical moment in baseball. And I was very happy that he got that moment.
And it's great, too, because there's certain intangibles that analytics can't factor in. And having that veteran presence and having that likability in the clubhouse, having that leadership is one of them. It's really hard to quantify that, especially in baseball where everything has become so numerical, everything has become so data-driven. It's really hard to quantify the value of a guy like Ross. But again, you saw that play out. And
you know what? Baseball's look, sports are personal to all of us. Like, we've all, like any listener, we've all played, like a lot of us, we play and then we envision ourselves kind of in that spot and stuff. And it just, we've all been Ross. Like, as you grow older, at first when you're in 23, 24, you think you're Chris Bryant because you're in your physical peak and you're dominating some of these games. Then when you hit Ross's age, that you've played more games than you're going to play. You've had you're probably had, and this is what makes sports so great. You think you've probably had your best moment you'll ever have personally, but then all of a sudden in your very last game, you could have it. Oh my God, it was great.
And something I want to touch on, because I think as we move through, our different categories, we're going to kind of touch on everything. One thing though, that we're not going to touch on, so I want to go to it here, the ending. Not the very ending of the game, but part of the ending that is not going to come up later. So I want to touch on it because we talk about the Rajai Davis home run. We talk about the game-winning double by Zobrist, but there's a key play that I don't think it's going to come up anywhere else in the podcast, and it's because we just mentioned Ross. It's Cody Allen walking Ross to lead off the top of the ninth, and it's huge. Now Ross gets taken out for a pinch runner. And it seems harmless because the Cubs are not going to score in the top of the ninth, thanks to a great play by Lindor, and then the bunt by Javi Baez with 2 strikes, which is going to come up later on. So the Cubs are not going to score in the top of the ninth, but that leadoff walk that winds up seeming harmless, and it was to David Ross. It's not harmless at all. See, because of that walk, Francona is going to have to make moves that are going to impact the rest of the game. And I need to touch on it because I don't think it's going to come back. First of all, Cody Allen can't get through the ninth. So because Cody Allen can't get through the inning, Francona has to go to Brian Shaw. If Allen gets through that inning, which he would have if not for the leadoff walk, if he gets through that inning, Shaw comes in fresh after the rain delay. But what happens is because they've got to go to Shaw, again, predominantly because of that leadoff walk, because they got to go to Shaw before the rain delay, after the rain delay, when they come back, he's gone more than 30 minutes in between pitches, and that has to have an effect on him. It's really tough to believe that doesn't have an effect on him. Plus, because of the leadoff walk, once they get that runner to third, Francona's got to go and replace Coco Crisp with Michael Martinez. So now Martinez, and of course Martinez will be the guy who makes the last out. And Martinez is the worst hitter in this game on either roster. I mean, the guy's 197.
Including.
What's that?
Pitchers including.
Oh, I mean, just, 197 career average, 507 OPS. So he's going to wind up making the last out. So 2 moves that Francona is going to wind up having to make that he doesn't have to make if not for the leadoff walk. And Cody Allen still talks about that, and these guys are human. They're not robots. He was just so juiced, so pumped to be in that moment. He said he couldn't feel his knees. He couldn't control his knees. And it took him that batter to settle down. Unfortunately, though, it's the walk to Ross. Again, Ross gets pinch run for. But everything that winds up coming out of that, even though they don't score, those 2 moves by Francona maybe wind up dictating the outcome of the game. So I don't know that it would have come up anywhere in the pod. That seemingly harmless walk, though, may have been or is one of the key
and keep in mind who replaced Ross? Montero. He gets a big hit to drive in a run.
Absolutely. Right, so, if you don't pinch run for Ross there, and then Montero's still sitting on your bench.
Yeah, so it was incredible. I mean, that walk, and I've debated with you before on how important the walk is. We won't get into it, but goes to show.
Yeah, much different debate, though. Much different debate.
For those that don't know, I always have to make a Brandon Nimmo comment every podcast.
Hidden Brandon Nimmo reference.
This is the Brandon Nimmo comment where we can move on to Game 7 now.
Woo. So we're there. So let's get into the game MVP. We know that the World Series MVP is Zobrist, but let's talk about the MVP of this particular game. As we go through the MVPs, I think, again, we're going to get deeper into this game. Richie, your game MVP.
I mean, he gets screwed, but it's really tough for me. It's between 2 people. Basically, Fowler. I want to give it to Fowler, but I'm going to give it to Kyle Hendricks. Kyle Hendricks, to me, just was a beast. Error after error. And you know what? In Game 7, he just was like, nope, don't worry, guys. I got him. And he should have – who knows how long he should have pitched, which we'll get into. He didn't go nearly long enough, but it wasn't his fault. Madden took him out, and and then immediately the game imploded into a bullpen game. And it shouldn't have been that way. Kyle Hendricks was great. He was dominant. I'm watching that game, rewatching that game, and I'm like, wow. This guy, he has it. He has it. Let's see, can he go? I knew he didn't go 7 innings, but it looked like one of those things where he could have went 7 innings. And to only really give up 1 run, in my opinion, that was fantastic. I felt if he gives up 2 or 3 runs, this game is totally different, obviously. And I just felt like as bad as some of the bullpen pitch for the Cubs in some areas, I mean, maybe just Chapman in a way, but he was the steady. And if he would have went shorter, just like 3 innings, the Indians win this game.
And one of those nice little moves that Theo Epstein makes in the rebuild is trading Ryan Dempster for Hendricks, right? I mean, we talk about the tank, and it'll come up later. We talk about the tank, you talk about all that, but Theo Epstein, in building this team, makes so many of these moves, and that Ryan Dempster for Hendricks trade is really an outstanding one. Pete, your game ball or your game MVP, who's it going to?
It's going to go to Jason Hayward, which is kind of strange in its own right. But during the rain delay, Hayward pulls everybody into the weight room, and he says to them, "We're the best team in baseball for a reason. Stick together, and we're going to win this game." He just solidifies everything the Cubs are doing the entire game and how they're treating this. And he just the way he said it to them, from the way I've read and seen, it just ignited them. It united them and ignited them to make sure they would go out there and play the best baseball they could play after the delay was over. Now, mind you, the rain delay was 17 minutes, something like that. It wasn't the longest one, but it brought the team together to go out there and actually perform.
And about that too, Theo Epstein, I believe, he said he was like trying to eavesdrop, and he goes, the team that walked into that locker room, the weight room, was not the team that walked out. And when Bryant and Rizzo, both unbeknownst, right after the game in their interviews, they mentioned that. So that meant something. This wasn't like afterwards, hey, that was a great speech, let's give this guy who struggled, some love. This meant something to them.
It was
huge. Do they win without it? I don't know.
It made a real impact on them. It made.
And Schwarber even said, like, he was confident going into that last at bat, and he goes, I'm gonna get a hit. So I mean, I think that's, even though, listen, the signing itself, was the signing worth it based on that one speech? It's crazy to say yes, but it probably is yes.
And again, like we said earlier with Ross, it's not quantifiable. The idea of leadership and character and what somebody brings to a clubhouse, how teammates interact with each other, it's not quantifiable in terms of the data. It's not quantifiable in terms of the statistics, but it's there and it's real. And we saw it with Ross, and you see it with this Hayward speech. That's a real thing. We tend to blow it off as something that just happens in a movie, but it's real. Just like our interaction is real, just like, people interact all the time. It's these players interact. These players are people, and they're motivated by certain things. They interact in certain ways that are negative, that are positive, and they took a lot out of that moment from Hayward. And again, maybe not quantifiable, but super, super, super important. And another thing that goes down in history from this game.
What's really interesting too is Ross said when he pulled him in, he goes, I was getting scared because, is he going to give a bad speech here? And he goes, I was concerned, but it wasn't like that at all. So it was kind of interesting that the old crusty veteran didn't know Hayward enough to know that this was going to be a good speech. That was I found that interesting, actually, because it's like, I would think that Hayward, he would have known Hayward would be like, hey, he's gonna get it. But I guess Hayward's probably a guy, I mean, just totally guessing, I don't know, maybe it doesn't say a lot, but when he says something, it means something.
And that might have had even a bigger impact.
Yeah.
Now, for me, listen, again, we said series MVP is Zobrist. Game MVP is Rajai Davis. So the game is going to be historic either way, like I said earlier. But that home run puts it on another level. So the Rajai Davis home run makes this an elite game, right? You're going to have a historical night no matter what. It's going to be historical. We're going to have a streak end. We're going to have a champion. But this game goes to classic status because of Rajai's heroics, unlikely heroics, in a tough situation, in a big situation. And then, by the way, another thing is the RBI in the 10th. So he drives in another run to get them within one to set the stage for even more drama. But then, of course, Michael Martinez is in the game. And in a game that was totally unpredictable, and you never really knew what was going to happen in this game. You didn't know what was going to happen in a lot of this series. I think all of America knew Michael Martinez was going to make an out. And so it sets the stage. And listen, but you never know. But it was one of those things where, man, you're bringing up this, a 190 hitter, and you're saying this is not going to happen. Again, go back to the leadoff walk, how one play affects the next, and this domino effect in plays that might be seemingly harmless. So that Cody Allen leadoff walk to Ross is huge because now it's Martinez in this spot. But I think with Rajai, that home run, and man, you talk about a guy, and he's always going to be a legend because of it. But if the Indians win, I mean, Rajai is he the greatest sports hero in the history of Cleveland sports? It's.
I would still take that.
You know what? That might come up later. You say LeBron might take it, but I'm gonna tell you what. Regardless, I understand how they all celebrated, how desperate they were for a championship, and how they all celebrated when the Cavaliers won. But the Indians are way more important to that area than the Cavaliers are, and that's the reality. And those people are so desperate for a championship. And you had the whole Believe Land documentary. And I'm not saying that there's no such thing as Cavs fans, but the Indians are way. I mean, I could say way 37,000 times. They are way more important and way more loved and way more significant than the Cavaliers. So if that home run winds up winning the World Series, you might be talking LeBron status.
What about Jim Brown? I mean, I think he.
But again, in that moment, to break that streak, no one's saying that he is the baseball equivalent to Jim Brown or the baseball equivalent to LeBron. But in terms of the heroic status.
Okay, but one second. Speaking of LeBron, anyone besides me get annoyed during the broadcast when they would go to him, and not when the game was played. Now knowing that once again he left Cleveland, you're sitting there and you're watching him going, I know he loves Cleveland, but he just now watching it again, I'm like, he's a freaking fraud. I'm sorry, I feel like he's a fraud. I'm watching this and I'm going, oh man, really? No. And you left again. Oh, it just annoyed the hell out of me. I'd rather watch Bill Murray as a Cubs fan, because at least Bill Murray really is a Cubs fan.
Let's just say this.
He delivered though. So the one thing, we definitely have our opinions, on him. But I will say that LeBron delivered. Now we go to the should have stayed in the locker room category. So if Pete thinks that LeBron should have just stayed home, but should have stayed in the locker room. Richie, who should have stayed in the locker room that day?
I'm not done with LeBron. Real quickly, he did wear a Yankee. He did wear a Yankee hat.
Of course, yeah. He's so Cleveland. He's so Cleveland. We're gonna go play in Miami. We're gonna play anyway. We're gonna wear the Yankee hat. That's absolutely.
I mean, Madden. Wow, what a terribly managed Game 7. What a terribly managed Game 6 in a way too. I mean, the thing is, he had a thought in his head before the game, what he was going to do, and the game wouldn't change it. See, I get it. You have a plan, right? And who was it?
Mike Tyson. Talking Game 6?
No, well, I'm talking about Game 7.
Okay.
Like, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? That's what Mike Tyson said. But it seems like getting punched in the face wasn't going to switch Madden's plan. Madden had a plan that he was going from Hendricks to Lester to Chapman, and nothing was going to change that. And he wanted to get to Lester way too early. He warmed up Lester hardcore an inning before he went in. He actually warmed up the two pitchers that pitched in the 10th inning in the 3rd inning, Montgomery and Edwards. So and now they have to wait, how many hours to actually pitch after they've already warmed up. He took out Hendricks, like I said before. He was flying, and he struck out. He went 4 2/3, but he struck out the guy, and then the ump called it a ball. And then all right, let's go to Lester. And then Lester was cruising in the 8th inning. And then there was a ground ball to Addison Russell, which I know Pete you're gonna get to later, and that's a ball that even if he had to dive, he could have got to, and he should have got to. Most shortstops I think would have, and then he would get out of the 8th inning. But instead, he brings in Chapman, and I just think that's oof. The other thing is John Smoltz said something great. He goes, the Cubs are now buying outs. They're trying to buy outs because when Lester was pitching the 8th, he didn't think Lester was going to start the 8th. He thought Chapman, because Chapman was warming up like he was going to come in to start the 8th. And he probably should have if you're going to warm him up that much. So he's trying to buy outs. Well, the problem when you try to buy outs is when someone gets a hit. And now, as Rosenthal said before, they don't come in with a clean inning. Chapman's used to coming in with a clean inning. Lester's used to coming in with a clean inning. And these guys didn't come in with a clean inning, all because he brought them in too early and because he was trying to buy outs. Should have let the game breathe. Should have been like, okay, listen, it's Game 7. I get it, but my guys are looking good. Let them go.
I don't have the issue with using Chapman in 6, by the way. But just looking at this game, if you watch this game, you heard that Madden is this genius, this baseball genius, baseball savant, And it's not to take anything away from him because he obviously is a very smart baseball man. He's shown us that. But you would not get that impression from this game. There's a lot of mistakes by Madden. Now, I don't think that using Chapman in 5, 6, and 7 is one of those mistakes. But Game 7 in and of itself,
I think it was a terrible move putting him in Game 6 real quickly. I thought that was beyond idiotic. The game was you gotta know that it's got to come back to haunt you. You have to be able to trust your other relievers. And by the way, the other thing that
is your best, Rich. Your best is your best, and you're there. You may never get that chance again. I understand. Fine, you're going to talk about a 9-3 game, but you can't allow that to go to 9-4, 9-5, 9-6. This is it. There isn't a tomorrow, and obviously they've had that discussion where Chapman has said, "I'm up for this. I'm ready for this." I'm sure that talk happened.
Athlete doesn't say that. Every athlete says that.
You don't know what every athlete says. But I think that you can't allow that, dude. You can't. Again, it's a champion has to dictate the pace. And I'm going to go down with my best. That's it. Because otherwise, because you know what this podcast would be? I'm telling you, the podcast would be, how'd you not go to Chapman? How'd you let the game get so dirty that Chapman came in for 9-8? Yeah, it would. Because you always have to go with your best. That's it. This is not.
You can't always.
Yeah, this is not an afternoon game in July. It's Game 6 of the World Series.
So Dimitri, I know it's coming to me on who I would have left in the locker room.
Yeah, well, we're setting the stage for you because we know where you're going with this. So go ahead.
Chapman should have stayed in the locker room in Game 6, and that's where I'm a little different on this one. You needed him in Game 7, and Chapman point blank says after the game that fatigue hurt him, and he felt a little different in Game 7. Madden used him improperly in Game 6. I know you disagree. I know I get you can't let this game let Game 6 get out of hand, but you're killing him for Game 7. Chapman was not effective at all in Game 7. He just wasn't because you freaking killed him in Game 6. And Chapman should never came in Game 6. And that's my position on it. Unlike where you want to go and say, yeah, I get it. Play your best over. But Chapman, if you watch Chapman over his career, if you overuse him, he suffers. He's got no control. He may hit 100, but his control disappears. And the next thing you know, he's letting up hits and home runs. It's a mess. Madden, I agree with Richie. Madden probably should have stayed in the locker room. He managed this game improperly because he managed the game before improperly. And Chapman should have stayed in the locker room.
I think you got to tip your hat to Rajay. And I think Smoltz said you're going to get your pitch at some point. You're going to get that pitch, just like Smoltz knew it. Rajay knew it. And sometimes players just make plays. And, okay, he didn't feel the same. That's fine. But players sometimes are just – they're going to make plays. And I think Rajay made that play.
When he was speaking, I'm gonna say this quote again because I think it really, really it really, really tells a story. And Schmaltz said, the more you see them, the less they become electric. Hitters' eyes are more comfortable. And I mean,
understood. So what am I? Okay, the more you see him, we saw Corey Kluber a few times. So let's not start him. I mean, understood. It's real. It's a great point, but that as a manager, that doesn't mean that you go to your fourth best option. It's a great point by Smoltz, but it doesn't support what you say.
No, in a blowout game, that's exactly what it means. That's why you have a roster. It's not just, or else why?
No, that's not why you have a roster to play out a season. In that game, do or die, our season ends. My best guy is going out there, and you know what? He goes out in the ninth. He retires the side. Sometimes you tip your cap because a guy made a play, and Rajay Davis made a play. Rajay Davis was thinking right where Smoltz was thinking. You don't go down with your third or fourth best. I'm telling you right now. And especially, what happened in 2003? That was a pretty big lead against the Marlins. How'd that go? What happened? What happened in that game? That game was totally under control.
We could go to 5,000 games.
We could go to exactly, but you can't because you have to get to Game 7.
Go to 5,000 games or more than that, actually, where a 9-3 lead, the closer was not needed.
But this is your most important game in your franchise's history. A long history. You can't leave anything to chance. Again, you could have managed it differently, and you probably would have gotten the same result, but I will not get on him. That's the point. You would have managed it. You would have brought in somebody else, okay, and you probably would have still won the game. but I can't go there as a criticism of Madden. I can go to a lot of places as a criticism of Madden. I agree with you, but the one place I can't go is this guy bringing his best player in a World Series game to close out a World Series game, regardless of the score. I can't get him for that. I can't put the dunce cap on him for that one. You may not have made the move. I may not have even made the move there either. But I'm not going to give him one bit of criticism for going down with his best.
We're going to have to disagree on this one.
Yeah.
Listen, that's part of it. But I'm not, agree or disagree. I'm definitely not going to give him. I can't get on him. I can't get on him for it. Mai should have stayed in the locker room, by the way. And I think players are human. They're going to have bad nights. They're going up against other pros. You can't put a game on any one player. You can't bring a game down to any one play. But Corey Kluber didn't get the job done. And that's the reality. This is set up for Corey Kluber, right? Game 7, you're bringing out the guy who won the Cy Young in 2014. He's going to win the Cy Young again in 2017. That particular year, he's third in the Cy Young voting. For that 4, 5, 6 year span, he is one of the top 3 or 4 pitchers in the game. He's one of the top players in the game. He's one of the top stars in the game. This is set up for Corey Kluber to go out there, to dominate, to get the job done. And look, he doesn't. And that's the reality of the situation. He's human. These guys they're not robots, they're people, but he doesn't get the job done. And so for me, they should have stayed in the locker room. It's Corey Kluber.
Yeah, he 4 innings, 4 runs. I think there was a little surprising, but I mean, again, they saw him a lot, and that's what happens. Obviously, that's why it's so hard to do what Madison Bumgarner does. I think you got to tip your hat to the Cubs for getting him and Fowler on that on that first at bat.
That first at bat, you kind of sensed it on that first at bat that things were just not right. Something was off. He might have been tired. He might have been fatigued. It might have been a million different things. The pressure might have mounted because let's be honest, they were talking up all the historical value of this Game 7 for him, and he didn't look right the entire time he was in.
Well, we saw Bumgarner just dominate, the 2014 World Series, and then it's like, okay, are we going to try to see that with Kluber? And it's hard to do, really hard to do, and he wasn't up for it. And listen, still, they don't get there without him. But is it fair? I think it is fair because he did not have a good Game 7.
I just think the reality is that in the biggest moment in his career, he just doesn't come up. He's a star player. He's the franchise's star player. He's a franchise player. And in his biggest moment and in the Indians' biggest moment and on the biggest stage, he doesn't deliver. And listen, he shouldn't have stayed in the locker room, but he should have stayed in the locker room. But people who people who I'm glad didn't stay in the locker room are unsung heroes. Pete, your unsung hero.
Oh, it was Ross, without a doubt. Real simple. We discussed him so much in this podcast. He, the old crafty vet, the third catcher on the team, Lester's personal catcher. He's the guy that everyone goes to. And let's be honest, and he becomes the manager of the Cubs a few years down the line. He really is adored and loved by the players, the fan base, everything about him. Just he exuded what they needed at that moment. And without him being the way he was, and he came into the game and he screwed up literally on the first batter, but then he goes out and hits a home run, and there's something about it. I don't want to go too deep into it because we already have, but he was my unsung hero.
Richie, your unsung hero.
Well, first we're going to have to, for next podcast, teach Pete what unsung is, because Ross has pretty much sung the whole podcast. But what I'll give you the most unsung.
He's
hero.
Definitely an unlikely hero.
Yeah, that I would have given Pete. So what I like about doing this podcast is my process is I don't read anything about the game. I don't talk about the game. I just watch the game first because you don't remember a lot of things. And then I start writing down these key things. And this to me was such a great play. This guy, Albert Amora. I mean, who? His play is going to be forgotten by most people. Schwarber got a hit on the 10th inning to start the inning. They pinch run and put it on Mora. and Bryant's up. And now, from my memory, I thought Bryant had done something well. So I'm thinking Bryant's going to get a hit here. But he crushed it. And I'm still thinking it's a hit as he crushed it. But it was caught right at the wall. So I'm like, I guess I was wrong. But he took second base, Amora. And that became such a big play because then they intentionally walk Rizzo to get to Zobrist. And Zobrist hits the double, and then Rizzo would eventually score on the Montero single. Well, Rizzo doesn't score if he's not intentionally walked, and he's not intentionally walked if Amora doesn't get to second. And who knows what happens if Amora doesn't get to second, because then Rizzo probably, Rizzo gets up and whatever happens, and it changes history. That play, and another thing that Schmaltz said, he goes, 7 out of 10 players would not have went to second base. And I've watched a lot of baseball. I think it's 9 out of 10, to be honest with you. I think it's more than 9 out of 10. I think 95 out of 100 times that guy is going to, because he probably would have rounded second, as Schmaltz said, and then scored if it hits the wall. But instead, he saw that it wasn't a score. He comes back to first, gets to second. Great play. They might not win the World Series without that play.
And credit Buck, again, a better baseball guy than he's given credit for in real time. As that play is happening, he makes the same points that you make. So you want to give Buck a lot of credit too. For my unsung hero, doesn't actually play in this game. My unsung hero is the Houston Astros organization. And I mentioned this on a podcast we did about tanking, so you guys want to check that one out. The Cubs were clearly tanking in 2012. But the Astros out-tanked them. The Astros put on a master class in tanking, and they were actually 6 games worse than the Cubs. The Astros win 55 games. So the Astros draft Mark Appel. If the Cubs did what they intended to, if they were not out-tanked, they admit, and everyone around baseball knows, and they admit they would have drafted Appel, who wound up being a bust. If there is no Bryant, the whole rebuild is slowed. It's still a great job by Epstein, but the whole rebuild is slowed. So there's probably no playoffs in 2015. So then there's no roster bolstering for 2016. Maybe the playoffs in 2016, but I don't think there's a World Series run. I mean, Bryant's going to be the Rookie of the Year in 2015. He's going to be the MVP of the NL in 2016. So, and then, of course, if it plays out differently, Chris Bryant is thriving in Houston, part of a core there that's going to make them that much better and speed everything up over there. And maybe he winds up in Colorado. But and the thing is, when Joe Madden is asked in 2016 about the Astros taking Mark Appel, he says, thank you. And he was right. And that's the reality. And by the way, the whole, boo-hoo, woe is me Cub fan that never takes a break from all the crying about everything bad that they've been through. This was a tremendous break for the Cubs. So I think the unsung hero here is the Astros, because if not for the tremendous job of tanking, Chris Bryant is an Astro or maybe a Rocky, but he's not a Cub, and this doesn't happen the way it happens. So we go from there. We go to upon further review. It's something that we kind of noticed when we watched it again, something that just jumps out at us. And Richie, there's something that very clearly jumped out at you. And it's basically going to kind of build on what I said at the opening about fans and being a fan. Go ahead, Rich.
Well, when Fowler hits that home run, I was like, where was this game played? Because you heard the Cub fans. Now, at Game 7 in Cleveland, they waited so long to win a World Series, and they don't get all the tickets sold. The Cub fans are buying it off the second market. I mean, it's incredible how many Cub fans there were. Insane. It was just, and to me, it's the best fan base. I'm going to give you 2 stories why. In 2015, when the Mets beat them and swept them, and they swept them in humiliating fashion. Game 4 was, a lot of games are blowouts. The Game 4 was a blowout. Literally, they're all standing, giving them a standing ovation at the end. And it was incredible. I was watching. I was like, wow, what a fan base. And I said to myself, this would never happen if it happened to Mets. And sure enough, Game 5 of the World Series, when the Mets got blown out in extra innings where they gave all the runs, I was one of the only fans there. And I was like, wow, don't ever say Met fans are better than Cub fans. Cub fans are the best fans. And I'm going to tell you a personal story. So in 1988, as most people know, the Cubs were the last team to turn on the lights. They were the last team to get a night game. And it was a really big deal.
The Mets happened to play them on August 9th, August 9th and 10th. But they made 8/8/88 as the day for the Cubs to have the lights open. So we were there. We weren't at the game, but we were by Wrigley, and it happened to be rained out. But they played a couple of innings, and it was just such an electric moment, just being outside the stadium. It was one of the best games I was never at. Well, anyway, on that Saturday, we went to the Met. 2 days later, we go to the Mets Cub games, and I'm happy to sit next to this old guy. And we're talking about it. He's like, hey, I happen to turn on the lights. Like, what do you mean? Well, his name was Harry Grossman. I'm going to read this. For 74 season, the Cubs played only day games at home. And on August 8th, 88, the Cubs played the Phillies in the Park's first night game. 91-year-old Cubs fan Harry Grossman was chosen to turn the lights. After counting to 3, he flipped the switch and announced, let there be light. And I remember Harry Grossman as being like a really nice and knowledgeable fan. I happened to get so lucky to sit next to him. I remember I was going to ask him who was the best player. But before I did, he said to me, he goes, the question I hate most is who was my favorite player to watch? Who was the best player to watch? Because how can I answer that? I watched Babe Ruth, but who knows, out of all these players. And it just was like, he died in 91. He didn't make it, unfortunately. And I'm sure there's a lot of stories of men like him and men and women like him. But Harry Grossman, I hope you were able to watch him, Heaven, because you deserved it.
Richie, you said, where'd you meet him? In the old age home with the tapioca pudding again? Did you win that competition too?
Listen, it's a great story, Rich. I appreciate it. I think the listeners will appreciate it. But you took a shot at Cleveland fans. And Cleveland, I will now be the hero that you need and the hero that you deserve. I don't know anybody in Cleveland, but don't worry, I am coming to your rescue. It seemed like you took a little shot at the Indian fans waiting so long and, you're not even there. Did I hear that right, Rich?
100%.
Okay. Listen. I think if you rank or you compare fan bases, I think it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope because I think fans everywhere have the same core characteristics. So to a certain extent, fans are fans. And so the differences are demographics, their economics, their regional values. But fans are fans. But if you do want to rank fan bases, if you want to compare fan bases, I'm taking the Indians fan base.
Oh my God.
And I think you were very unfair to these people. But I think it's an interesting conversation, dude. First of all, the Indians had 455 straight sellouts. It's the same fans, by the way. 455. Did those Cub fans ever do that? In a smaller stadium to sell out. And those 455 sellouts, by the way, that doesn't even include playoff games. And 6 out of the 7 years they were in the playoffs. So the 455 sellouts, I didn't count all the home playoff games, but it's probably closer to 485, 490, somewhere in there. Here's the thing. I just think it's Cub fans this, Cub fans that, Cub fans. I just think the reality is I think they're a very wealthy fan base. They draw off of a huge area, so there's more people. You have that like fraternity party atmosphere, slightly pretentious and obnoxious, but it's a lot of fun. You can go to Wrigleyville, you spend all day there with the bars, the shops, the restaurants. It's a humongous fan base in the Midwest. Chicago area is huge. The team's been around since 1876. You got the third largest market in the country. You have all the Notre Dame alum. You have all the Northwestern alum, right, who then are going to go back home to where they came from. And that's why when they say Chicago travels well, yeah, those are people who went to Notre Dame, people who went to Northwestern, people from Chicago who then, were transplanted for work or whatever. Again, it's a super wealthy fan base that has a ton of discretionary income. So you can't now turn this around where you have with the economic part of it is very real. I mean, those are the same Indian fans that sold out 455 straight games. But in that area, those people don't have the same discretionary income. So you can't then get on them because either they're going to sell their tickets to make 1, 2, or 3,000, or they're just not going to pay that. It doesn't make them any less fans, and it doesn't make the Cub fans better because the Cub fans are wealthier and because there's way more of them. I mean, Cleveland and their surrounding area just doesn't have as many people as Chicago. And again, economically, they're way more depressed and they've had more issues than what we've seen in Chicago. So I think it's a commentary on sports, man. I'm not gonna, yeah.
The Los Angeles Chargers play a home game,
in the AFC Championship game, I don't think I'll ever hear a game where so many more fans are in a big game like that are for the opposition. That's all I'm saying. You're right. There's more. And, but I wouldn't have said how great Cub fans are if it wasn't for that how loyal they are. In 2015, they're still standing up and cheering, until the last out, standing ovation, everyone there. I don't know if we would have saw that for Cleveland. I'm curious about that. And
I think they're great fans. I just think the economics of the situation dictated that these people were going to get outspent by people coming from the Chicago area. And I just think that's what happened. And the reality is, in general, Cleveland's attendance has taken a hit over the last 10 or 15 years. It's not the same attendance as it was. But again, it's an area that, economically there's been somewhat of a recovery, but it's still a pretty hard hit area economically. And sports is expensive. So you can't really blame people. It doesn't make them any less fans, right? You always have to consider the situation. So I think Indian fans took a really big hit from people watching that. And it didn't, I don't think they really understood the whole situation. You know what it's a lot like? I think, frankly, Rich, and you could relate to this, I think it's a lot, in a sense, same but different, like Jet fans. So like Jet fans, right? You sell out Shea Stadium for years, terrible teams. Through the 70s, did they even have a winning team in the 70s? I don't think so. They didn't make the playoffs throughout the 70s. The Jets go to Jersey. For those of you who are listening and may not be Jet fans, the Jets are a Long Island team. They always were a Long Island team. The Jets go to Jersey. The Long Island fans follow them to Jersey, dude. Long Island fans spent up to 10 hours in a car on a Sunday to go and watch the Jets in Jersey. The Jets at one point had a 10-year waiting list. But the prices kept going up. The prices kept going up. The prices kept going up. Eventually, the Jets moved their offices to Jersey, the practice facilities to Jersey. The players moved to Jersey. Long Island fans kept asking the owner for, some kind of a credit for gas, for tolls. None of that was given to them. The owner then starts adding insult to injury by charging fans to be on the waiting list, which led to a lawsuit, which led to another lawsuit. Eventually, Jet fans either A, just stopped going. They didn't stop loving the team, but they stopped going to the games. Or the ones who were continuing to buy the tickets then wind up just turning around and selling them to Steelers fans, Cowboys fans. Jet fans are great fans, but if you don't understand the whole situation, you would look at it and be like, why is the stadium half empty? Why is the stadium full of Dolphin fans, of Steeler fans, of Raider fans? But the Jets and their Long Island fan base, it's a super passionate fan base, but I don't think you wouldn't know that if you didn't know the whole story. And I think with the Indians, dude, I think it's an economic thing. And it's sad because those economics have affected fans across the board. The Indian fans are great, man. I think they're just as good as Cubs fans. And I'm telling you, they're better because the Cubs never sold out 455 games. And Indian fans are going because they love the game, right? I mean, Cub fans, it's a matter of being seen. Cub fans, it's a matter of the party at Wrigley all day. I've been to both those places. Those Indian fans, they're all baseball fans. The Cubs fans, half of them are just going because it's a day at Wrigley. And I think it was tough that America got that impression of Indian fans, and it was the wrong impression.
When the majority of games are day, though, so you're going to work. People are who's going to these games during the day. I mean, so what was that? Elia Sosa, or who was the manager that bashed the Cub fans and said get a job?
Was it Ozzie Guillen?
No. I think it was Elia Sosa. We should have checked that. I didn't know that the convo was going to go this way, but some old Cub manager when they were losing, I think in the 80s.
Oh, okay, Cub manager. Okay, I thought you were talking about an opposing manager. No. But of course they had those. They had the day games, which could hurt attendance, could help attendance in some ways. But the reality is, I think the Indians have great fans, and I think the Cub fans too. There's also becomes this thing in sports that was popularized by ESPN. It's kind of this like reverse bandwagon where teams love to not necessarily follow a loser, but follow a loser on the verge of winning. Because then it's like, oh, I've suffered the whole time. It's been my cross to bear. They kind of want to show up at that last second. And I always got that feeling with a lot. And listen, the Cubs, the core is a great fan base. But I got the impression that a lot of them were just coming to the party and giving the stories about my grandfather this, my father that. And then you watched maybe a couple of Cub games in your life. So there's kind of that bandwagon of, I'm a long-suffering fan, but you didn't really suffer. I get that impression.
Funny, in 2019, I went to the World Series of Poker, and I don't want to talk about it, made a deep run, but whatever. The point is, I'm walking around, and all I see are Cub fans. Just Cub fan after Cub fan after Cub fan. And it's funny because I was like, are you really a Cub fan? Like, I know you know who Sammy Sosa is. I know you know who Chris Bryant is, but you know who Ivan De Jesus is. So I'm just kind of curious about that.
I got to tell you, I've been to Wrigley. I've been to Chicago a bunch of times. Real fans, I hate to say it, are the White Sox fans because they are now long suffering and they got more problems and they know what to do.
They won a World Series before the Cubs, though.
Yeah, but first off, they play in a crappy ballpark. You can say whatever you want about the new Kaminsky.
Not so crappy, but with all the stuff they've done, it's actually pretty nice. But you don't have the atmosphere around it. I mean, dude, you got tracks, you got the Dan Ryan Highway, train tracks.
It's a different mentality and a different attitude. It's not this big old party like Wrigleyville, and not even close. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I feel more for Sox fans than I do for Cub fans, and I've been that way for a while because it's a different mentality on the South Side compared to Wrigley.
Ferris Bueller isn't wearing a White Sox.
Exactly.
So, if you would have told me then. If I would have told you then that blank would blank, tell me about it. If I would have told you then, what would you have been surprised? Again, we're not going back too far here. I mean, sometimes we do games from the 90s, from the 80s. We're not going back that far, but still a lot has happened in, these last few years. So if I would have told you then that what? Pete, what do you got?
Addison Russell. Good old Addison Russell. In Game 6 of the World Series, he has, 6 RBIs? He was an All-American. He was supposed to be the next coming of Christ, I think. And he plays for the Kiwoom Heroes in the KBO now. Addison Russell. Unfreaking believable. It just goes to show that maybe you shouldn't be such a piece of crap and do something stupid and get banned for 40 games in Major League Baseball. And then watch your career turn to crap, because that's exactly what happened to him. And now he plays for Kiwoom, which I believe is in Seoul. I mean, he had a quarantine for 2 weeks, and I think he's playing fairly well. But, yeah, you're basically playing double-A ball, but buddy, come on.
And not that Billy Beane wished anything bad on Addison Russell, but in a way, he comes out of this looking a little bit better because remember, he took a lot of heat, man. He was skewered for that trade. Because Billy Beane trades Addison Russell for was Jason Hamill and Samardzija, Jeff Samardzija. And then Beane actually went out and got John Lester, man. He was all in. So he goes and gets Hamill, Samardzija, and Lester in July of 2014, man. He went for it. And it didn't work out. They lost that crazy wild card game to Kansas City 9-8, and it doesn't work out. And all the Oakland fans like, oh, my God, you gave away – we went all in. It didn't work. And now we've given away Addison Russell. And the following year, Hamill was back with the Cubs again. Lester signs with the Cubs. And I think Samardzija wound up with the White Sox. So that just doesn't work out for the A's at all. And Billy Beane's getting roasted for the trade. And now it doesn't look so bad for Billy Beane, right? Because of what became of Addison Russell. And at least the A's made the playoffs that year and gave a little bit of excitement. So I guess if there's one guy that's feeling maybe a sense of relief in the whole thing, Billy Beane. Right?
Yeah. Addison Russell, it's just you want to talk about just the downfall. It's just ugly. It's so ugly.
Yeah, and it's and for the reasons too. I mean, it's just like, come on, man, be a better human being. Richie, if I would have told you then that what?
Well, if you would have told me then that the big winner of the 2016 World Series is Brian Cashman, I would have been a little surprised, but wow, Brian Cashman, I mean, what a charmed life. The general manager of the Yankees since forever, winning all these World Series. And then in 2015, even though the 2016, even though the Yankees are in the periphery and a little behind in the wild card race, he still has the foresight. Now, they couldn't have done this if George Steinbrenner was still alive. But he's like, you know what? We're not going to win the World Series this year. We're not really contenders. Maybe we can make a playoff push, but probably not. I'm going to give away my 2 best relievers, Chapman and Andrew Miller. And I'm going to get Clint Frazier from the Indians and Gleyber Torres from the Cubs. And then combine that with they both have crappy Game 7s, Miller and Chapman. They both could have stayed in the locker room, right? I mean, and they get, listen, Clint Frazier has not been used properly by the Yankees, but when he's used, he hits. And I think that he'll probably be a trade. He'll probably be traded. We don't know when you're going to listen to this. It's 2020 right now. Who knows the type of career he's going to have, but he's showing promise. But we all know Gleyber Torres is a beast. A beast. And I think that, the big winner of course, the Cubs are the big winner, but the second biggest winner of the 2016 World Series is Brian Cashman for those phenomenal trades.
Oh, but wait a minute. And then he gets Chapman back.
Which might have been a bad mistake.
Might have been, but still, you get what might be the premier closer at this point in time back after the World Series.
And I want to say something about Chapman because I don't know if I'll get the chance. It's really, it's funny when we go to games, right? When you're seeing a major league pitcher that you would strike out 40 out of 40 times, right? 100 out of 100 times. If you got five, you're striking out 502 times against a major leaguer. Well, in the ninth inning of a Met game, day game, I was able to get front row, and Chapman was pitching with the Reds. And I know you're going to strike out 502 out of 502 times, but with Chapman, you won't even see it. He pitched so fast, and it was just so incredible being sitting in the front row watching him pitch for the Reds was insane. I was just like, wow, the Mets are never going to get a hit. I was going to be just as good as David Wright that day because this guy was just, you didn't see 100 back then. I think maybe that hurt him is that pitchers starting to catch up because now a lot of pitchers pitch 100. So maybe that's what hurt Chapman. Maybe that's what set his dominance at first because he was probably one of the first pitchers to throw 100, more than 100. And I guess,
Sid Finch, excuse me.
Yeah, well, he pitched 119, right?
Yeah, straight.
But anyway, that was just Chapman. Brian Cashman really outdid himself there.
I think for me, if you would have told me then that David Ross would be the manager less than 4 years later, and then Madden would be coaching, that would be out managing the Angels, I mean, I would have been like, what? And it's not right. What's that?
The unsung hero, David Ross.
Right. So I think part of it is that you wouldn't have believed that Madden would be, managing elsewhere in 4 years because, I mean, all of those Cubs just rise to godlike status. So I wouldn't necessarily have believed that Madden would have been out, especially with the core of players on that team. You would have thought that there would have been enough success that Madden would still be there. But just the change in baseball that has led to guys like Ross being hired, and it's not a knock, but it's really – it was going in that direction, but it's become such plug and play. Like teams are just run by the general managers now, right? Teams are run by the front office. So the managers are just paint by numbers, and managers are there to communicate with the players and to just in a sense be a guide on the side, be a life guide or a life coach, communicate with the media, communicate with the players, because the game has gotten so robotic. It's just paint by numbers. And you've seen that over the last few years, whether it's these guys, they come right off the field and they wind up being hired. Craig Counsell in Milwaukee, Scott Service in Seattle, Aaron Boone, Kapler, Baldelli, Carlos Beltran for like 2 weeks. So you've seen, it's just something that's happened in baseball over the last few years that you saw it coming, but not really, because, in 2014 and 2015, you saw the success that Ned Yost had, and he was an old school manager. And, the great run that Bruce Bochy had with the San Francisco Giants. And there's more of, an old school guy. And then the success that Leland had with the Tigers, 2011, 2012, 2013. So managers were still a thing, and you would not have really guessed just 4 years ago that we were going to go in this direction where managers were just kind of these caretakers of the players, these basically media relations guys, player relations guys. And that doesn't take anything away. All the guys I mentioned are really, really bright baseball guys. So that's not a knock on Counsell or Service or Baldelli or Boone, and definitely not a knock on Ross. But the reality is that the position, the job just changed. So I'm surprised that Madden's not there and that Ross is, but also where we've gone in 4 years with the game. How quickly we've gone to the manager's role has just totally changed. And so all of that definitely is something that if you would have told me then, I would have been surprised.
And let's see, by the way, how Ross is able to keep his relationship with the guys that he won with. Joe Girardi had to deal with that. It's different when you're a peer, even though if you're looked up to, a kind of a mentor, and now you're the one making the decisions, even though, of course.
But they're not. So that's why I would have agreed with you, but I don't anymore.
But he's still making some decisions. It's not like he's just it's not like he's just a representative of Theo Epstein when he hands in the lineup.
I think a lot of times these guys are right now, and I don't know, dude. I don't know. I think that the players understand that it's just. I think it's so paint by numbers right now. I think if you allow, and it's going to be different team to team, but I just think baseball's going in that direction. It's so robotic. It's so paint by numbers. The numbers and the percentages dictate everything that these guys do, and the players understand that. And I don't even know that these managers are in a position anymore where they're going to, anger the players by the decision they make, because every decision comes from a book or a computer.
Nah, I mean, you know what though? Then why does Mickey Callaway get fired for the Mets? People get fired. Listen,
I got it. Why did he get fired out of the Mets? Why? Because Wilpon needed someone to blame, because Brody needs someone to blame for making the dumbest trade in the history of trades. So that's why he gets fired. Yeah, so, I mean, your example's terrible. That's why managers are always going to get fired, because you need someone to blame.
I think, though, that the managers, have less say. 100% agree with you, but they still have some say. It's not like they're just a puppet. I mean, they might be a puppet on some areas, but they're not a puppet on all areas. And they still, leadership still matters. So I think that, listen, come the seventh inning, I know they've had talks like what's going to happen pregame, what we'll do in this situation. They're still making pitching changes. They still have some say. So it'll be interesting to see how his relationship changes with those players, especially Rizzo and Bryant for me.
Point taken, but I still just think that it's easier, because I think those guys understand. Rizzo and Bryant get that a lot of this is just not even coming from Ross. But all right, Pete, what do you got, man?
I was gonna say, look at what the Yankees did. You went from Girardi, who, yes, he was a player, he was a catcher, he managed the Marlins. He actually was a real manager who managed like Torrey managed in a lot of ways, but he was a disciplinarian. And then you go to Aaron Boone, and I take nothing away from Aaron Boone. I like Aaron Boone. I think Aaron Boone's a pretty good manager. But Aaron Boone is really there to placate to the stars that are there and keep them happy. He's not the the stars didn't like how Girardi would get, and that's why the Yankees went to Boone.
And I think in that case, specifically Sanchez, Girardi had his issues with Sanchez. And yeah, exactly.
I have my issues with Sanchez.
And Girardi was an old school manager who wasn't listening to the GM. Like the GM, Brian Cashman cannot go to Girardi and tell him everything he can, like he can to Aaron Boone. Also, but I don't know if the Yankees are that analytical in that sense, where they're only going to, where the GM's going to make all the decisions. I think the Yankees manager has probably more power than a lot of teams' manager.
I agree with that, but the difference between the two is that, they needed someone that could placate Sanchez. And that's what it was really about. And, but we all have problems with Sanchez, like I said, and even Boone does too. So it's a whole other story. But the Yankees are a little bit different, but that's why they went from one to another. That's what it was all about.
So now we go to our college of internet knowledge, right? We take the time machine to all these different periods, and we do our best to kind of try to remember what it was like, learn about these time periods, try to research these games. Anything interesting you guys learned as you did the research? First of all, before I even go there, I'm going to piggyback on a point I made earlier. You try to research these curses, okay? The Billy Goat curse that hung over the Cubs and is the reason that they didn't win, not since 1908. I think that curse came in 1945. You find so many different versions of it that it's not even worth going into it. Again, just nonsense. I think everyone needs the curse. Everyone needs the suffering. And then the Indians with the Rocky Colavito curse. It's almost as though, well, we need a curse too. Everyone else has a curse. So this guy that we trade to the Tigers in 1960, he just put a curse on us. Colavito is like, what are you even talking about? This is absurd. So I got some other things to get to, but I just wanted to touch on that because we talked about that with the fan thing. It's just almost like, in vogue, fashionable to have a curse, to be suffering. Everyone needs their version of the curse of the Bambino. And the Billy Goat thing, it kind of took – Cubs fans of a certain age too, they'll tell you, especially some of the older guys, they were like, we didn't ever, this thing was around, but it wasn't anything anyone talked about in the 60s or the 70s. And, the 84 NLCS against the Padres, it's something that got a little bit of play on TV, and then it kind of started to grow from there, and then it really blew up and became a giant ESPN thing. But anyway, the point is my research shows so many different versions of the Billy Goat curse that it's like, come on, man. And then the Colavito curse, that's just a bunch of nonsense. But I'll go to Pete because I do have a few things though. What do you got, Pete?
I'm going to go back to the broadcast for a second, because watching this game made me remember. Now, mind you, it's only 4 years ago. It's not long. The stat casting, because I didn't get into it earlier, but you watch a ball game now, and it's like everything is analyzed to the point of no return. Launch angle, speed of the ball coming back off the bat. This game, watching this game, it wasn't like that. Yes, they did go to the Amazon. Amazon's the sponsor, and they showed, launch angle, and they showed speed. But I think it was twice the entire game. Whereas now, all they do is show it on every home run. Hell, they show it on freaking doubles sometimes. You're going, shut up and just fucking watch the game. I want to watch the game. I don't need to know all this stuff. I want to be entertained. I want to enjoy this. I don't need these freaking analytical side of it. I mean, I know it's a little bit of a different take on it, but it drives me nuts.
Yeah, Richie, I don't know. Did you come across anything? Because I know you actually, though, I don't know if you found anything, but you agree with Pete.
Oh, 100%. You know what? I was watching this game and just I enjoyed the broadcast a lot. And that was when Pete brought that up. I was like, wow, you know what? You're right. Like, it was just so much fun. The sounds of the game, I wish they would let us enjoy that more. You know me, I hate that little box to tell me what's a strike or not, because I know what a strike is. I feel like, don't get me wrong, I do think that Major League Baseball should kill the umps and go to the box strike. But watching the game, what I really enjoyed there was they didn't show that unless it was a close play where the umpire may have missed, which happens. And I just felt like that was such an enjoyable broadcast because it let us breathe. I don't need to – listen, when someone crushes the ball, I know he hit it hard, right? Like, I know it. 117 versus 110 doesn't really matter to me that much, or actually at all. So I would rather, like, if you want to show it to me once or twice a game, I'll live with it. Maybe I'll enjoy it. But I don't really need anything more than that. It was just less is more in this. I hate that phrase, but it's true. Less is more. Let us breathe. Let us enjoy the game.
Yeah, and for me, as I was doing my research, I come up with things that, in this case, there were some interesting little tidbits. But one thing that jumped out is something that kind of everybody probably knows, but it's still worth mentioning again. 1989 is the year. So the Time Machine has visited 1989 at other times. You want to check those podcasts out as well. But the year is 89, and Major League and Back to the Future 2 both come out. And so you've heard the story, but it still just hits you. I guess the irony, for lack of a better word. So Major League and Back to the Future 2 are two of the higher grossing movies of 1989, especially Back to the Future 2. And then Major League has become a classic with baseball fans. So Major League basically paints this picture of what it would look like if the Indians ever won. And almost the movie's like a caricature of itself, right? How ridiculous it would be if the Indians ever won. And so many of our ideas, so many of the conceptions that we have about the Indians and their fan base and how pathetic they are all come from this movie. So in 1989, as a moviegoer in 89, you kind of have this picture painted of what it would actually look like if they won, and how inconceivable it is that it could ever happen, and all the inconceivable things that would have to happen for them to win. And in that same year, in Back to the Future 2, these writers, they're writing. Marty McFly winds up in 2015. He winds up in 2015, and they have to come up with just what would the craziest headline be that he would read? What would the craziest thing that Marty McFly could possibly see on the cover of a paper? And the craziest thing that is something that would also make the 1989 movie audience laugh. And so they go with Cubs win the World Series, right? And so with these 1989 movies, right, that are, come out within months of each other, one movie is just about how ridiculous it would be that the Indians would ever win and everything that would go along with it. And the other one is just how inconceivable it would be that the Cubs would win. Now, not to mention that they actually almost did win in 2015. So the movie almost hit it on the head. They wound up obviously winning in 2016. But I just think the 1989 thing is it's something that we all knew, but it's just this irony. One little thing that I think was surprising, again, something that I knew but I forgot about. The Cubs were originally known as the White Stockings. So they're formed in 1876. They become the Cubs in 1903. They're the White Stockings, which is weird that your rival is named after you. Kind of an odd thing. So the White Sox, in essence, are named after after the Cubs. And you get that a little bit in the New York market too, where the Mets aren't named after anybody, but the Metropolitans, they have, the blue of the Dodgers, the orange of the Giants, and the pinstripes of the Yankees. So, it's kind of a tip of the cap to baseball heritage of New York. But that the White Sox are actually named after the Cubs, who were one of the founding members of the National League, was an interesting thing. I think it's just something that I just always glossed over. Richie?
Yeah, that was a fascinating thing about the Simpsons do that all the time. Where they just peer into the future and they get it right. And I think that's a great thing.
The Simpsons do get it right, and the Back to the Future writers almost got it right. Now, of course, if you would have written Major League, you would have had all of the opposing fans. Was Clu Haywood played for the Yankees, right? So
Yeah,
the league, the opposition were the Yankees. So Richie and his hatred of all things Cleveland and Indian fans would have written that movie totally differently. Listen, Cleveland, I speak for me. I'm here to stick up for you. I love you. Richie, on the same point, whatever. I don't know if he had some bad food there. I have no idea what his problem is with you guys.
I went to Cleveland just so Cleveland knows. In 2006, I passed through Cleveland on my trip to Vegas.
Didn't care enough to stop.
I didn't stop.
I did. I slept at a hotel there, and it was great. I watched the Red Wings game. It was a playoff game, and I have friends, the Norrises, my friend Brianna. They're from Cleveland, so I have a couple friends. Matter of fact, by the way, I named my hockey team the Cleveland Browns because at the time they hadn't won a game in so many years, and I felt bad for them. So after every win, we would take in the regular season, we took a team picture, and we ended up going 9-1, winning the championship. Hero, and I coached them because I was injured, and so I love you, Cleveland. I don't know what they're talking about.
You really mock these people, Rich? Do you really need to put salt on the wound and mock them by naming a team after them because the team was so terrible?
They do not want your pity, Rich. They don't want your pity.
Don't worry, Pete and I love you, Cleveland.
Yeah.
So and we as we travel through time, let's talk a little bit about 2016. Pop goes the culture because the culture goes pop. 2016, listen, superhero movies have kind of had this resurgence. They've been big for a while, but 2016 I think is really the year of the superhero movie. Captain America: Civil War, Batman vs Superman, Suicide Squad, Deadpool, 4 superhero movies in the top 10, and that doesn't even include Doctor Strange. So you had definitely the year of the superhero movies. You guys, listen, I'm a big superhero movie guy. Richie, not you so much though.
No, I don't watch too many movies, and I hate superhero movies. They're stupid. I watched Superman. That was interesting back in the day. I like that. After that, I don't think they could top it. We're done.
Stupid. All right. So the guy hates Cleveland and he hates superhero movies.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Unbelievable. And I tell you what, TV too. TV, it's 2016 is the year of the Stranger Things phenomenon. So Stranger Things, if you haven't seen it, obviously now we're a few seasons in, but 2016 is when it begins. And it kind of kicks off this nostalgia kick, a love for all things 80s. Because Stranger Things, it's got that Goonies feel to it. And that's kind of exploded where from 2016, you go to 2018, you get the Cobra Kai. It really just everything 80s comes back. And not that it starts in 2016, but 2016, when we're in the time machine traveling around 2016, we definitely get this 80s nostalgia vibe. Pete, what do you think of pop culture in 2016?
Yeah, you had the Rio Olympics in 2016 too, if I remember right.
Absolutely, Rio Olympics. Mm-hmm.
And they had a lot of issues with the facilities that they built, and they're all overgrown now, and they might have actually bankrupted the country, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah, dude. The Olympics, it's prestigious, or at one point it was prestigious to hold these Olympics, but basically these Olympic committees spend so much money and they wind up bankrupting these countries with stadiums and facilities that they never use again. And you saw what happened with Rio. We saw what happened with Athens. These countries really think 2 or 3 or 4 times before wanting to host an Olympics anymore. And the Olympics in general isn't as prestigious as it was anyway.
Not at all. Yeah.
We used to be, this is for another podcast, but it used to be all amateurs, and that was kind of exciting. And now really the amateur, there's just so many pros are playing in the Olympics now in all sports, really. It's just not. And now that we know what happens to the poor people that host the Olympics.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have so many options. I mean, you remember when you basically had NBC, CBS, ABC, and the Olympics was a thing that captivated the entire family for 2 weeks. You
Yeah.
know, I can remember just sitting there and watching the Olympics with my family, especially the Winter Olympics, because the Summer Olympics, and that's fun too. That was great. But at least in the summer, you're outside, you're playing with your friends, you're doing some other things, right? Whatever, barbecues. The winter, I mean, you're a really captive audience in the winter. So I really can remember vividly watching Winter Olympics with my family. And it's, there's so many options now. And this goes not just for the Olympics, but for everything. It takes a hit because you have so many options on TV. You've got the internet. There's so much stuff to do. But yeah, 2016 was an Olympics year. And I think 2016 was Beyonce Lemonade, which Rich, big fan.
What?
Exactly. Legacy on the line. We talk about, oh, by the way, I mentioned it in the intro. The biggest thing is going to happen just a few days later. It's an election year. And it's so amazing that you have a game of such historical proportions for sports fans, a game that's, like I said, it's really good. It's going to echo in eternity, that Cubs Indians game. And then just a few days later, you have the Donald Trump Hillary Clinton election. So really within a few days, you have these two monumentally historic moments in 2016.
So we don't lose half our viewers either which way. I think we should move on.
Just an election. It's just
it was a very historic election.
Yeah.
That's the end of it.
Yeah, it's an election, but regardless, well, you already chased away our Cleveland viewers. Thankfully, we saved them. Legacy on the line, man. We always talk about these legacies. Rich, you and I were talking. I mean, the legacy here, I think a lot of this legacy, look, the 2016 Cubs, they're going to be immortals. They're immortals in sports history. They're going to go down, obviously, in sports history. They're going to go down in the annals of baseball history. In Chicago, those guys are going to be royalty forever. But I think the most important legacy here might be Theo Epstein's. He's the man who ends the two great curses in baseball history. I think his impact and his legacy, they're tremendous. And I want to say with Epstein, the thing about him, I think baseball, not just baseball, but like big business, American society, for so many years, it's been run by like a club of elites, right? There's like a boys club or older men who were there, not because they were the most qualified, but because they were the most connected, because they were part of a club. And Epstein helps kind of, change that. He changes that in baseball. And we've seen it, not necessarily because of Epstein, but we've seen it change not only in baseball, but you've seen it change you've seen it change now in every sport. We've seen it change in business. We've seen it change in finance. We've seen it change in government. That there's a movement that jobs of significance are given to the most qualified people. They're given to bright young minds, not just necessarily to the old guard or to the establishment. And Epstein is the guy who kind of changes that in baseball. And I you can't really you can't overstate that. It's a significant thing. You look at what general managers were and who the general managers were really before Epstein, and then the guys like Epstein. And I think it's just a tremendous shift. But I know, Richie, you're big on the legacy of Theo Epstein.
Yeah, and by the way, it also changes how managers have to react to how old, crusty managers like Tito Francona has to act towards Epstein, because if he's like, kid, you've never played the game, you don't know this. Well, guess what? You're out of a job, and he's going to find someone that will work with him. And I think that really changed a lot. Their success was really a breeding ground to kind of how, if you want to stay in the game, you better be open to stuff like analytics. What I found amazing about this was you were going to have Francona or Epstein crush two dynasties. And as a Ranger fan, growing up, a New York Ranger hockey fan, I knew all about 1940. That was the last time the Rangers won the Cup. And when they won after 54 years in 94, there's that famous sign, the guy holding, "Now I could die in peace." And it was just, Mark Messier, it was 94, where 26 years later, he's still a legend in this town. And these Cubs, are going to be a legend forever. Their brotherhood forever. Rizzo said that in his post-game speech. And I think the legacy of Epstein, being able to do that with the Red Sox and Cubs, those are the two biggest. As much as it would have been amazing for Francona to do that with the Red Sox and Indians. That would have been amazing.
Well, it
But
would have been the two biggest. If Francona did it with the Indians, it would have been the biggest at that time, right? Because if the Cubs would have still been on the board, so he would have broken the two biggest curses that were broken or streaks that were broken.
Yeah, well, the White Sox, probably.
But they were done. So I'm just saying, like, for the times that he was,
if you want
when
to
he
talk
did them.
before anyone broke their curses, right? If you talked about the two biggest,
By the way,
not
curses are nonsense.
necessarily in years, but like just in thought process, it would have been the Red Sox and Cubs.
Yeah,
and Epstein did that. This guy's a Hall of Fame. As long as he doesn't do anything tawdry, this guy is a Hall of Famer, undoubtedly.
Which I think Francona is too, by the way.
Oh, 100%.
But
I agree with that. But let's go to the other side. Let's go to the Cleveland Indian legacy. They are still the lovable losers of Cleveland, no matter what. All those good years in the 90s, they get to the World Series and they get to play the Cubs and they lose. Cleveland is still the lovable loser team. And, we talk about the Yankee Red Sox, how the Yankees were always better than the Red Sox, and then the Red Sox, finally, end the curse of the Bambino. But you need to really look and see how good the Indians were all those years when the Yankees were beating the Red Sox. They were beating the Indians too. And there were years where the Indians were the better team than the Red Sox. And that this city has got to live with this team that just can't get over that hump. It's crazy. It's a crazy legacy for Cleveland because they have been they were good. They were a good team for a long time.
And there's so much too that kind of goes into that I guess that legacy. You had the ugly empty mistake by the lake, which even when that stadium was full, it wasn't full. Right? I mean, if 100,000 people,
it was a 100,000 person stadium for baseball.
Absolutely. So with 100,000, I mean, you could put 40,000 people in there, and it's still more than half empty. And you'd have those cold nights by the lake. It was just, and it kind of went along with everything. The kind of the ugly, dreary feel of playing baseball in that stadium kind of went along with how bad some of the teams were that we saw in the 80s. But again, going through their history, there was a lot of great teams too. It just didn't win. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they threw a perfect game, and someone said, "How could it be perfect? It's in Cleveland." And
again, you picking on our poor Cleveland people. Man.
Let me just say this. Let me say this about Cleveland. Okay, let me throw this something at you to maybe make them like me. No, I'm just kidding. This could make me even worse. I don't know if you could pick a different franchise besides the Cleveland Indians that you feel more pain if you're a fan, because it's easy to be a Lions fan in a way because we're never in it. We suck all the time. But to be a Cleveland Indian fan,
another city.
to be so close to a World Series so many times and have such good teams. And they're still good, but they're just never going to get there. Cleveland's not winning the World Series anytime soon. They're not winning the World Series. And they're good enough to win it. That's the crazy thing, but they won't. They never will.
Actually,
and even in Major League, they didn't win the World Series. There was 3 Major Leagues, and no one watched Major League 3. But I know they didn't win in Major League 1 and 2. I mean, how crazy is that?
Major League 3 had nothing to do with Cleveland. They ended up in Minnesota.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? I mean, I feel bad that you didn't watch it, but how crazy is that even in a romantic movie as great as Major League 1 and 2, they still didn't win the World Series. My God. You guys could hate me, but I'm glad I'm not you.
Yeah, you got to have the feeling too, man. They don't win, when you don't win in 2016 and you don't win with that dynasty that almost was, are you ever going to win, right?
Richie, you should know how it feels. You're a Jets fan. Come on.
You know what? It's funny
too. Come on.
You know what? But as bad as the Jets are, we never were. The Jets were never like as good as Cleveland was. They never went to a Super Bowl. The Jets are perfect in the Super Bowl. We're 1-0. We can't be beat. But in all seriousness, the Jets in my lifetime were only close to a Super Bowl really once when they were beating Denver. And
even then, you knew they were going to lose.
Your life, first of all, your lifetime. Okay. This would wind up being a totally different podcast. Dude, 81, they end the season as the best team in football. That's your lifetime. I know the Bills, they lose that playoff game to the Bills, a game they should never have lost. And they fall behind. They make that crazy comeback, the heartbreaking interception. 82, they go to the championship game, and the Dolphins have to soak the field. And then they do it with interception.
Doing 3 interceptions. I mean, I'm just saying.
Look, 81, 82, they're probably the best teams. 86, they get off to a 10-1 start. 85, they a good season where they lose the wild card to the Pats. But I mean, come on, the whole woe is me.
When you talk about winning a Super Bowl, if you've never been in one in my lifetime, it's tough to say we were
close. Dude, there's the AFC Championship game against the Broncos. Then there's a whole 2 other AFC Championship games with the Mark Sanchez. So you've seen, I mean, wah. There's AFC Championship game in 82, AFC Championship game in 98, the AFC Championship games in whatever those seasons were. What, 09
really games, too many though. I mean, I know
God, it's still 4 AFC Championship games. See, you're a Cubs fan. Wow, woe is me. Everything is so hard for me. Oh, I've never seen this. I've never seen that.
You know what? I'm sure if it was 18-0 in Game 6, they still should have put in Chapman, in your opinion.
So what are our closing thoughts on this game, Richie? Closing thoughts on this game.
I mean, it's going to be a franchise that is going to remember this team forever. And as someone that remembers the '94 Rangers, if Sergei Nemchinov is at a bar and I'd recognize him, I'd buy that man a beer. And all these guys, maybe not Montero or Russell because they ended their Cubs career not in the greatest of way. Outside of those two, this team will be remembered forever and ever and ever. And this is out of all the World Series that's ever had, this one might be the best Game 7 I've ever seen in a lot of ways. And one last thing I'm going to say, I should have led with this. They're now in 2020 talking about making a 7-inning game because the doubleheaders now are 7 innings, and a lot of the announcers want to leave an hour earlier, so they're saying all games should be 7 innings. This game I'll point to as why there should never be a 7-inning game, including doubleheaders, because they managed this game from pitch 1 to get to the 9th inning, and this was just such an exciting game. And the fact that in the 8th inning, all the drama happened, and then the 10th inning, the drama happened. It just a phenomenal game, and this is why baseball should be played with 9 innings.
Oh, don't forget, you got a rain delay, too. You had a rain delay in there as well, 17 minutes of tarp. But, yeah, let me tell you, this is one of those games you watch, and you say this is the best baseball can be. It's just played well, managed well. Yes, we have our issues with certain things that happen with certain managers and players, but it was a well-managed, well-played game. And all you could ask for is that when you actually, as a fan, that's all you want. You want to be able to sit down, watch, and enjoy it. But, and there's always a but baseball still got to figure out where their problems are and fix it because, yes, Richie, I agree. Going to a 7-inning game isn't going to make it any better, any faster, any more enjoyable. But games, this World Series ended at 1 o'clock in the morning. Fans don't stay up on watch TV until 1 o'clock in the morning. Those numbers were high when it started, but by the end, you got a rain delay in there. People are gone. It's tough to deal with. But the last part that I will say is the legacy. You want to go with the Cubs. They'll be always remembered. Everyone will know who they are. Everyone will be loved except for, let's be honest, Russell, Addison Russell's a whole other story. But the poor Cleveland Indians, they're still the lovable losers that won't go. They just won't win, and it's awful.
Yeah, and I started with the fans, and you end with the fans, and we had some great conversations about fandom during the podcast. But you feel great for those Cub fans because no matter what we've said, there's certainly a great core of Cub fans and a lot of them out there, and you did feel happy for them because so many people who wanted this for their fathers or their grandfathers or who had been through so many tough times, and you felt for them. But then on the flip side, how heartbreaking it is because, like you said, the Indians were so close, and will they ever get that close again? And just in our lifetime, how they were almost there in 95 and in 97, and it's like, man, how heartbreaking and heart-wrenching it was for them, and they just go back again to the wait till next year. So it just that whole game, as good as it was, as classic a game as it was, I think every pitch, it's just, for me, it's just thinking about those two fan bases, because it's always about the fans. There's always going to be glory for one side, is elation and celebration for one side, heartbreak for the other. But these two have been so, lack of a better word, tortured, that I think you felt that with every pitch, and that's really what you're gonna take out of this. And every time you rewatch it, I think you're gonna feel that with every pitch. So that just about wraps it up. Actually, it does wrap it up for us. It's time for us to get the time machine back to the future. Once again, wherever, whenever, however you listened, however you joined us, we thank you. We appreciate it. We had a lot of fun. We had a blast spending some time with you, and we can't wait for the next time. So for Pete Sod and Rich Glanzer, I'm Dimitri Adraktis. This has been the Sports Pod Time Machine, presented by Yackers Huddle. Until next time, take care, everybody.
Copyright 2021 Yackers Huddle Media Group, Inc., all rights reserved.